And next, I'd like to introduce Eric Ozols, our own fella here. He joined IEAAH on March the 1st, 2016, and has made quite an impression on our groups here in Southern California. He's assisted with frequent panel discussions for believers and non-believers and often ran that soundboard for Phil. He's represented IEAAH on the First Religion panel at Crafton Hills College. He's very active with Ask an Atheist outreach at Redlands Market Night. So without anything else, please let's welcome Eric Ozols.
All right, welcome. As Reb said, my name is Eric Ozols. This is Exposing the Errors of and Responding to Cosmological Arguments. This is prepared for the Inland Empire Atheists, Agnostics, and Humanists, and Freethinkers around Redlands. Like she mentioned, I do run a social media empire. I'm calling it AtheistU. My current slogan is please don't sue me, because I don't want to become an expert in copyright law, and I'm taking people's videos and exposing their errors and responding to them by posting the video after production. So please don't sue me is my motto. I'm on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I've also got a Patreon page. I don't need your money. I make a comfortable living. If there's somebody else out there that needs the money and they're a better content creator than I am, donate to them first. But if you're just riddled with guilt because you love my content so much, I've provided an avenue for you to do so, okay? All right. Why is there something rather than nothing? This is the cover of Skeptic magazine. It just showed up in my door a couple days ago. Quite serendipitous. If you're going to formulate a response to something like this being said to you, I'm going to offer some advice. There's different methods of response. First, you can just respond on face value. The next thing you can do is you can question the question. And the third thing you can do is you can get meta. Okay, and I'm going to explain what I mean by this. If you just answer the question on face value, you are granting definitions, assumptions, and fallacies. If you respond with question the question or getting meta, you're challenging the assumptions and fallacies and definitions, okay? I spend most of my time thinking about method 2. I'm going to offer a couple of suggestions about method 1 and method 3, but I find them to be not very interesting because there's so many errors which I'm going to expose that when you grant those things, even for sake of argument, you're giving up a lot of ground in a conversation with somebody, okay? So because I spend so much of my time in method 2, you're very scrappy. You're like Rocky, okay? You're chasing the chickens, you're lifting the logs, you're running through the snow, you're punching the meat, you're fighting for every inch, okay? So I'm inspiring you guys to be like me. Be like Rocky. Don't give up inches, okay? Today, prepare to be overwhelmed, okay? I talk fast. This is very dense. It's going to come at you very, very quickly, okay? This is the proverbial drinking from a fire hose, okay? So this is going to be you guys today, and I apologize, but it's going to be recorded, so it'll be immortalized forever, okay? This is why I say please don't sue me, because this is Family Guy. Seth MacFarlane's a good atheist fellow, so he's not going to sue me, but I didn't give him credit, right? So, but at the same time you're going to be overwhelmed, you're also going to be slightly underwhelmed. And the reason why is because when someone asks you a question like, why is there something rather than nothing, and I tell you to respond with something like, why do you assume there's a why? It's slightly underwhelming. This is not a silver bullet. This is not the kind of thing that's going to stop somebody in their tracks and go, oh my gosh, I've been indoctrinated since birth. God's not real. Thank you so much for liberating me. It doesn't work like that, okay? These conversations are long. They're arduous. It takes much, much time to express what's wrong with these ideas and get through to somebody, okay? Everybody's asking me for a silver bullet. I see many faces in this room who've asked me to, how do you respond when somebody says this? And I tell them, and I see this forlorn look on their face. I'm like, I'm sorry, I just don't have silver bullets. So when you're pointing out somebody making a paradox, okay, sometimes you have to say silly things back to them. Like when somebody says, oh, I'm going to go do this thing because my friends are doing it, and the response is, would you jump off a bridge if your friends were jumping off a bridge? You're getting silly back at them to show them how silly they're being, okay? So when somebody is asking you a question that relies upon a paradox to make sense in their heads, like, why is there something rather than nothing? Sometimes you have to get silly to respond back to them with something that sounds paradoxical as well. So this will be slightly underwhelming and not quite as satisfying as you want because, like I said, there are no silver bullets. Excuse me. Okay, so today's docket, we're going to talk about what cosmological arguments are, what they sound like, the different varieties. I'm going to give you an example, and then all at once I'm going to show you the history, some word usage, problems and failures. See the purple? Everything I do is color-coded. If you see purple, think problem, okay? This is me telling you what's wrong with the idea being espoused, okay? And then it's me offering you possible responses. If you came here today looking for possible things you can say back to someone, this is where you're focusing, gold, silver, and bronze. Because I'm super creative and I came up with this gold, silver, and bronze thing. I didn't steal from the Olympics or anything, right? So the best responses obviously are gold, serviceable responses are bronze. You'll get the idea, it shows up real quick. When you see orange, that's me emphasizing something. I want you to focus on that, okay? When you see red, this is where I tread with much trepidation. This is what I should not be talking about, but I kind of have to talk about it because religious apologists talk about it. Your uncle at the dinner table who's telling you why does something come from nothing, he talks about this stuff, so I've got to talk about what he's talking about. Does that make sense? Okay, if you have questions, please write them down on the pads Reb provided, or write them on your phone and save them for at the end, okay? Because I may answer your question in about 4 or 5 minutes. There's some overlap, and some things have to come out at a certain pace and a certain sequence here. Okay, so what cosmological arguments are? The definition of cosmology, obviously, dictionary is not official. I'm just using one for a good starting position, okay? So cosmology is a branch of metaphysics that deals with the nature of the universe, a theory of or doctrine describing the natural order of the universe, or a branch of astronomy that deals with the origin, structure, and space-time relationships of the universe, or a theory dealing with this matters. Okay, that's the root word. Cosmological is relating to the origin and development of the universe. So that's what I'm talking about. Where do things come from? How did they get here? The method by which we got about whatever somebody's asking. That's cosmology, okay? What it sounds like casually is this. This is going to come at you real fast. Where did everything come from? How did everything get here? Something can't come from nothing. From nothing, nothing comes. There's never been nothing. There's always been something. Things don't create themselves. What happened before the Big Bang? Why is there something rather than nothing? Who created the universe? I told you. Fast, right? But this is how you hear this argument manifested all the time, okay? These are the casual versions of that. Who created the universe? These are the casual versions of that. But to understand and expose some of the errors, it helps to look at the formal version just so I can get it up there as a template and I can pick it apart and throw darts at it all day long, okay? So the different varieties of the argument are the classic and the kalam, okay? There are actually more, but these are the major players, and if we just focus on these, you'll get 99% of what you need to know about cosmological arguments if you're interested. Okay, I apologize for this. This is bad, okay, but I'm going to have to subject you to this. This is a video. You've probably seen it online. It's very popular, okay? It's about 2 minutes long, and you might need a shower afterwards because it's rough, okay? But as you watch, pay attention to these key words: cause, begins, exist, universe. Again, I'm so sorry to do this to you.
I am confused. Being philosophically consistent and being a very honest person, I'm sure you can tell me where God came from.
Go ahead.
All right, your question, where did God come from, assumes that you're thinking of the wrong, obviously it displays that you're thinking of the wrong God, because the God of the Bible is not affected by time, space, or matter. If he's affected by time, space, or matter, he's not God. Time, space, and matter is what we call a continuum. All of them have to come into existence at the same instant, because if there were matter but no space, where would you put it? If there were matter and space but no time, when would you put it? You cannot have time, space, or matter independently. They have to come into existence simultaneously. The Bible answers that in 10 words. In the beginning, there's time. God created the heaven, there's space, and the earth. There's matter. So you have time, space, matter created, a trinity of trinities there. Just, time is past, present, future. Space has length, width, height. Matter has solid, liquid, gas. You have a trinity of trinities created instantaneously, and the God who created them has to be outside of them. If he's limited by time, he's not God. The guy who created this computer is not in the computer. He's not running around in there changing the numbers on the screen, okay? The God who created this universe is outside of the universe. He's above it, beyond it, in it, through it. He's unaffected by it. So the concept that a spiritual force cannot have any effect on a material body, well then I guess you'd have to explain to me things like emotions and love and hatred and envy and jealousy and rationality. I mean, if your brain is just a random collection of chemicals that formed by chance over billions of years, how on earth can you trust your own reasoning processes and the thoughts that you think? Okay, so your question, where did God come from, is assuming a limited God. And that's your problem. The God that I worship is not limited by time, space, or matter. If I could fit the infinite God in my 3-pound brain, he would not be worth worshiping, that's for certain. So that's the God that I worship. Thank you.
I like the response of the audience. because that's where I am too, okay? Huh? All right, so we're just talking about the ideas, okay? The gentleman you heard in the blazer is Kent Hovind, okay? He calls himself Dr. Dino. We're just talking about his ideas, nothing about him personally. He's got a very interesting history. If you're interested, ask me later on. But his ideas stand or fall on their own merits, okay? So we're just talking about his ideas. You actually heard a litany of, I don't want to sound pejorative, nonsense, which is a compliment to what he said. You actually heard a lot of stuff there. You heard a cosmological argument, and then you heard evolutionary argument against naturalism. I've only got your attention for maybe an hour and 15 minutes at the most. I can only do cosmological in that time, okay? So we're just going to focus on what he said in the first half. The last 20 seconds, everything after spiritual force not affecting a physical body, I just can't address today because there's just too much meat on the bone, okay? If it sounds like he's running a script, it's because he is. So if you've ever been subjected to someone trying to talk you into a pyramid scheme or a multi-level marketing scheme, they're running a script on you, okay? So what I am offering you are ways to knock them off the script and make them think about mistakes they've made. Does that make sense? So they can figure it out on their own. Because you can't just tell somebody a mistake they made because they don't want to hear it. But if you ask them a question and help them figure out the mistake they made themselves, you get to solicit their brain power to solve the problem they just tried to give you. Make sense? All right, so it helps to understand the history of how this works. We're going to start with the classic cosmological argument. It goes a little something like this. Everything which exists has a cause. The universe exists. The universe has a cause. We call this cause capital G God. What's wrong? It should leap off the screen at you. It's so obvious. I'm shaking, okay? Premise 1, everything which exists has a cause. What is everything? Is everything all things? If a claimed version of a God is a thing, premise 1 applies to it. Correct? Everything which exists has a cause. So the very thing cosmological arguments are trying to establish as existence cannot exist if the first premise is accurate. It is a paradox. Okay? Now, we figured out what's wrong. God needs a cause, right? So when you ask somebody questions, if they're silly enough to make this argument, you can ask them decapitating questions like, what caused God? Who created God? Or where did God come from? You just saw this with Professor Mustache. I love his mustache. I can't have facial hair professionally, and this would make Civil War generals jealous, okay? So his name is Reinhold Schleider. He's very smart. This debate took place in 2004. I've watched the whole thing. It's about 2.5 hours long. It's actually not that entertaining, but this video watches like a slam dunk if you are a religious apologist or you want to think religious claims are accurate. This watches like a slam dunk because Professor Mustache asked Kent Hovind, where did God come from? But Kent Hovind knows something Professor Mustache doesn't know. Kent Hovind knows Kalam. Professor Mustache does not know Kalam, okay? So now it's my job to show you Kalam, okay? So this is Kalam. They came up with this argument because they recognized what was wrong with the first one, right? The absurdity, the paradox in the first premise. Premise 1, everything which begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. We call this cause capital G God. What's wrong? Okay, this one has a lot more going on than just the first one, okay? I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about this, so I put them side by side. Classic on the left, Kalam on the right. We're going to spend a lot of time looking at this slide because this is my dartboard that I'm going to throw at, okay? If you'll notice, the only thing different from the left side to the right side is this phrase here, begins to, began to, premise 1, premise 2, okay? That's all they've changed. It's a verbal sleight of hand. You follow? There's another error here, but I'm going to come back to this one because this is a big part of the equation. There's more errors to point out. So remember, problem purple, right? There's a hidden assumption here. Everything inside the universe has a beginning, right? So they're making an exception with their claim, with their premises, which is called special pleading, but that's a separate issue. If you've ever engaged with someone who calls themselves a Jewish or a Christian apologist, they love this stuff, okay? Because this is like hot cocoa and a blanket on a warm, cold night, okay? Because in the Bible, the first chapter of Genesis, the very first thing it says is, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. You heard Kent Hovind say it in the video. They love this stuff. They could rest their whole argument on this case right here. They'll just keep saying beginning, beginning, beginning. And then they're going to point at really smart scientists and say, they say beginning. Look, the argument says beginning. Look, the Bible says beginning. Therefore, case closed, God exists, sell your soul to Jesus. They loved this stuff, okay? So the problem here was the guy on the right, Kent Hovind, knows the Kalam workaround. The guy on the left here did not know the Kalam workaround to this argument, okay? So if I'm going to offer suggestions to you, remember this is a refresher, we're going to go face value, method 1, question the question, method 2, or we're going to get meta, okay? The first couple of these are going to be face value. You'll tell by my enthusiasm, I'm not the biggest fan of face value because I don't like granting errors. I like correcting errors, okay? So method 1, you can say something along the lines of, okay, deism at best, how do we get to theism? If we grant the argument and all the assumptions and all the premises and all the errors that are there, yes they are, this argument does establish deism. In case you're not familiar, deism is a non-interventionist God, starts the universe, stands back, and lets it happen. A theistic God is something interventionalist, answers prayer, impregnates virgins, can split the Red Sea, makes people rise from the dead. That's a theistic God. So at best, this argument, either side, has established deism. They've not gotten you to theism, okay? That's a direct response, method 1. It's bronze because meh, right? Another response you can give is specifically your brand of theism, because even if you were able to establish that it was theism, which you haven't done, you've got to make sure that it's your brand of theism, because how do I know it's not Hinduism? Because that counts as theism as well, right? Okay, another response is there's what's known as the gap problem. There's a gap between this argument, what it establishes, and establishing the existence of a moral causer, a moral giver, a moral agent. This really impressed David Hume. I'm really not that impressed by it, but it's out there. It's a tool for your bag if you care about it. Something else you can say is, how would you know it was only one theistic causer and not a committee or aliens? Because even if you've only established the existence of deism or even gone so far as theism, at best you've gotten one, maybe multiples. How would you know the difference? How could you know it from inside the creation itself? So, committee of gods or aliens, you wouldn't know. Okay, so back to our base here. Method 3, meta just a little bit, then we're going to spend a lot of time on method 2. Are arguments invented kinds of things or are they discovered kinds of things? Okay? Invented kinds of things are like hurricanes, things we find. We find hurricanes. We didn't invent hurricanes. Don't give me the climate change, global warming. I know that. You know what I'm talking about, right? Don't do that. That's called pettifogging, okay? We discovered hurricanes. We did not invent hurricanes. Just like bananas. We discovered bananas. We did not invent bananas, right? But arguments are invented kinds of things. If it's an invented kind of thing, where do inventions come from? Our minds, right? So if you can get somebody thinking this, it might knock them off script a little bit, help them realize some of the mistakes they've made. Okay. Arguments are only sufficient to establish things which exist argumentatively. If you're trying to tell me something exists materially or is capable of moving material, i.e. parting the Red Seas, impregnating virgins, you can't just bring me an argument. You need material evidence. You need commensurate evidence for this claim you're making. And argumentative evidence is great for establishing the existence of conclusions, arguments, but not things which actually affect the world around us. Follow? Okay, that's it for premise. That's it for mode 1 and mode 3. I'm going to spend most of my time on mode 2 here. So we're going to focus on the word cause. Remember the video I asked you to focus on keywords? Cause, exists, universe, so forth. The first one we're going to focus on is cause. Okay, a question you can ask somebody is, how are you using the word blank? Or what do you mean by the word blank? This makes me talk about synonyms, okay? What is a synonym versus what is a semantic? If I say the word soda, and Phil says the word pop, and Dorothy says the word Coke, and Jeff says the word soft drink, these are synonyms, right? We're talking about the same thing. We're talking about a carbonated, cold, sugary beverage, okay? In this context, all these words are synonymous. Fair? Synonyms are what I call convergent semantics. All the meanings converge on the same thing. Different words mean the same thing. Now, semantics is a gigantic field of study. I could stand up here and talk for 6 months about semantics, but I don't have time for that, obviously, so we're just going to use this delineation, which is convergent, and what I call divergent semantics. Okay, divergent semantics. Let's look at something like the word hurricane. If I say hurricane, I can be talking about a meteorological event. This is Hurricane Michael as it crossed over Panama City, Florida a few months ago. The red circle there, the red square there, that's the flag they fly when hurricanes are coming. If I say hurricane, I can also be talking about a sports team, the University of Miami, Florida. They call their teams the Hurricanes, okay? I could also be talking about a cocktail. If you're in Bourbon Street and you say hurricane, you didn't order a tropical storm. You ordered a cocktail, right? Because it's a divergent semantic. You follow me? I could also be talking about this guy. This is Reuben Carter, okay? He was wrongfully convicted of murder in Paterson, New Jersey back in the 60s. I know it so well because Bob Dylan wrote an excellent song about it called The Story of the Hurricane, right? Denzel Washington played him in a movie. So you follow with what I'm talking about, with the difference between convergent semantics, which are synonyms, and divergent semantics. So how does this manifest in conversations like this? Divergent semantics are not synonyms. The problem becomes when you treat divergent semantics as synonyms. Follow? So we're going to look much deeper here at cause, begins, universe, and exist, and how they are employed as divergent semantics. Now, this has a very specific name. This is called the ambiguity fallacy, okay? Which is when an unclear phrase with multiple definitions is used within the argument, therefore does not support the conclusion. Some will say single words count for the ambiguity fallacy, which is really a specific form of fallacy known as equivocation, right? I can't leave any stone unturned, so an equivocation is also known as doublespeak, okay? Which this definition would be using an ambiguous term in more than one sense, thus making an argument misleading. This is what they're leveraging against you with cause, exist, universe begins, and so forth in these arguments. Equivocation, ambiguity, doublespeak, duplicity, it all means the same thing. All these come from a book called Logically Fallacious by Bo Bennett, and I actually took pictures of the pages. See how the words over there kind of get a little cattywampus on the side there? It's because it didn't come from a website. Who has paper books anymore? I have paper books. This thing that they're doing, ambiguity fallacy, doublespeak, or equivocation, is the bread and butter of religious apologetics. If they can't do this, they pretty much can't do anything. This is 95% of what they've got, okay? So we're going to work through exposing some of these issues. Okay, we're talking about cause. Let's talk about cause as a divergent semantic, okay? Think about how a snowman is caused. Think about how a snowstorm is caused. Think about how a hurricane cocktail is caused. Think about how a hurricane meteorological event is caused, okay? The delineation should be obvious. It should jump off the page at you. Snowmen and cocktail hurricanes are caused intentionally. Snowstorms and hurricane meteorological events are caused unintentionally. Snowmen are caused consciously. Hurricanes are caused unconsciously. You follow? But they're just saying cause. They're treating it as one thing and asking you to accept it on face value and respond. What caused the universe? Well, what do you mean by cause? This is why I say, what do you mean by cause? Get them thinking this way. What mistake have you just made, right? Again, this is their bread and butter, okay? How are you using the word cause? It's not a gold response, but maybe it'll get somebody thinking down that road. What do you mean by cause, okay? Here's a good one. Are all causes the same kind of events? The answer is no, and they should know that, but they don't. That's why they're employing it as one thing. We can also say, how can we have knowledge of a cause outside of the universe? I like that one too. Okay, we talked about cause, but there's another issue going on here. Remember Kalam? They added this verbal shift to include begins to, began to in the first premise and the second premise. Okay, everything I just said about cause also applies to the word begins, because snowmen and snowstorms begin different ways for different reasons. Everything I just said about cause and it also applies to begins. So here were my suggestions for you to ask someone to throw them off script by saying how are we using the word cause and so forth. Look at these words. See, cause is in every one of these because you're mirroring what they're saying to you and you're responding back to them using their terms. Look, the questions I'm giving you to respond with are identical if you use the word begin, because in this sense, they're synonyms. So I'm going to do it again. There's cause, there's begin. There's cause, there's begin. You follow? This kind of comes into focus a little bit more when you realize the tricks they're playing, okay? All right, another problem with the way you're using cause and begins. Here's a hand, here's a fist. Here's a hand, here's a fist. This illustrates what Aristotle called creatio ex materia and creatio ex materia. Creatio ex materia and creatio ex nihilo, which in Latin means out of material and out of nothing, okay? So creation events are different. If you just say cause or begins or creation, there's different kinds, i.e. things made out of material, which is every event we have evidence for ever, right? Everything that's ever been created in our popular consciousness has been created by taking some material and rearranging it, right? Like a snowman and carrots and snow and coal and a top hat, right? Creation out of nihilo, creation out of nothing, is hypothetical, purely hypothetical. but they're using it as an equivocation, which again is their bread and butter, okay? So all these things we talked about earlier, fists and snowmen, all these things have material beginnings. But to ask you about beginnings and include material beginnings and non-material beginnings, beginnings out of nothing, is equivocation, is again their bread and butter. So how do we get somebody off this script? Some of the best ways I can think of is to say, are beginnings out of material the same types of events as beginnings out of nothing? This will help them figure out a little bit of the error they made. It's not a home run, but it's going to help them walk down the path to figure out the mistake they just made. Another problem for how they're using begin and cause is what's known as the fallacy of composition. So we've got hurricanes and we've got water droplets. So if I say to you something like, water droplets are small, hurricanes are composed of water droplets, therefore hurricanes are small. We recognize the error right away, don't we? Okay? What is the error? This is called the fallacy of composition. And to illustrate this, here's our set. Let's call this the universe. Inside the universe, things with causes and beginnings, fists, snowmen, hurricanes, so forth. This doesn't necessarily mean the universe itself has the same kind of cause as events inside the universe. This is the fallacy of composition, confusing what something is made out of with properties of what it is. Now, the question I'm going to offer you to respond to this is, again, not a home run, but this is a very important point. Now, your uncle at the Thanksgiving table doesn't know what the fallacy of composition is, and you're not going to explain it to him like I just did to him. But the best way to get him to think about it, or somebody who's more familiar with some of the esoteric elements of this argument, would be something along the lines of, are properties of part of something also properties of the whole? It's not a home run, but it's about the best you can do because this is a little bit more heady of a fallacy, of an error they're committing here, okay? All right, so we just beat up on cause and begins to, but there's a couple more things to say about these two phrases in particular. If I take a baseball and I throw it through the window, I am the cause of the window breaking. But I, throwing the baseball, am antecedent to the window breaking. Causes always precede their effects. Law of cause and effect. Causes always precede their effect. What cosmological arguments do is they co-locate causes with effects. This is another problem, okay? So a better way to illustrate this to somebody is to ask them is, do causes always precede their effects? The answer is yes, and the error they're making is co-locating them at the same time. Does that make sense? A little deeper down the rabbit hole here, Aristotle recognized the problem with this doublespeak equivocation I'm talking about. He came up with different kinds of causes. First one he said was the efficient cause, the material cause, the formal cause, the final cause. An efficient cause is you making a snowman, okay? A material cause is the material out of something which it is made. The snow, the carrot, the top hat, the coal, okay? A formal cause would be the actual snowman itself, and a final cause would be fun time with your family, having a whimsical snowman in front of your house, or the memories you take with a picture, okay? Now, in these types of conversation, the formal cause and the final cause don't have much utility. They don't manifest very much at all. So I'm kind of going to leave those out of the equation. What we're talking about here is the efficient cause and the material cause, which is the effector and the affected. When you're writing papers in college and high school and you never knew which one to write, effected or affected, this is how I think of it. The effector is the thing doing the affecting, and the affected is the thing getting affected. Does that make sense? Okay. What cosmological arguments do is they conflate efficient causes with material causes. Again, conflating, double-speak, equivocation, this is their bread and butter. So we can ask them something like, are all causes equivalent? No, they're not. Efficient causes and material causes are different kinds of causes. But when you treat them as one and the same, this is doublespeak. This is duplicity. Follow? So we beat up a lot on the word cause and begins. There's more, but I don't want to overload you guys. So just as a recap of just the word cause and begins, so far in sequence, it's been the ambiguity fallacy, duplicity and equivocation, baiting and switching synonyms for divergent semantics, conflation of creation out of material and creation from nothing, the fallacy of composition. We know causes happen inside the universe, but not necessarily to the universe. This conflates efficient causes with material, and it also co-locates causes with their effect. Just in those two words, begin and cause, they've made all these errors. You're like a mosquito at a nudist colony. What do you talk about first? What mistake do you point out first, okay? All right, moving on. We talked about cause. Let's talk about the universe. I'm going to start with the etymology, okay? The word root of universe is Latin. Uni means one. This is going to come at you fast. Verse means version loosely. Universe is one version or only one version or all versions or all things or everything. Everything. Universe in this context is equivalent to everything. It's a synonym. It's a convergent semantic in this context. Some contexts it's not, but in this context, philosophers treat the word universe as a synonym for everything. Everything equals universe. So if we draw big circles on the board, because that's what I like to do, we talk about all things, everything inside the circle, space-time, universe, cosmos. Notice the red. That's the first place I'm walking with trepidation, because this is above my pay grade, but I'm aware of that, and I'm calling myself out, right? All of existence, all sets, okay? So if this is all of these things I'm saying it is, and I'm pleading with you to think it is, what goes outside? What's in the black next to it? Nothing, right? Nothing. If this is all things, this is nothing on the outside. The problem with cosmological arguments is they co-locate God with nothing. It is a paradox in and of itself. The argument actually argues for the non-existence of a capital G God, in which case, I think they're probably right. God would equal nothing. This is what they've done. This is what they've argued. This is why it can be so challenging to respond with, because this is the mistake they're making, okay? This is also known as Russell's paradox, which is much deeper down the rabbit hole. This is why it's a bronze response, because it's definitely not a home run. Does the set of all sets, which does not contain itself, contain itself? If you answer yes, then it doesn't meet its own definition. If you answer no, then it doesn't meet its own definition. This is more of a mathematical thinking type paradox. This will manifest itself a couple of slides down the road here. This is not the kind of question you're going to ask somebody that's going to stop them in their tracks. But if you can explain Russell's paradox, this actually really helps somebody understand. Okay, just contained within the word universe, we've exposed Russell's paradox and the fact they have co-located and equated a claimed version of a God with nothing in itself. However, sometimes the universe is a divergent semantic, and I don't want to be guilty of what I'm accusing somebody else of doing. So I'm going to walk down this path, although I probably should not because it's way outside of my pay grade. This is a giant can of worms to talk about the multiverse, okay? So I'm just going to touch and go on it real quick with the way it manifests in these conversations, with the way apologists use this stuff, okay? Physicists talk about the cosmos the same way philosophers talk about the universe, okay? They treat those as a synonym. When you talk about the multiverse, there's several different kinds. There's parallel multiverse, and then there's the chain multiverse, okay? To illustrate these things, and the whole screen's going to turn red because I'm way out of bounds here. On a parallel universe, if everything is the cosmos, that's all things, and each one of those blue circles is its own verse, call it a here verse, maybe not universe is the best term, but if each one of those is its own universe, and we're living in one of those, okay, there are other universes happening simultaneously that we don't have access to, okay? This would be one of the parallel universe ways of talking about the multiverse. Everything I've said about cosmological arguments up to this point, you could supplement the word universe for the word cosmos, and it would apply the exact same way, okay? Another way they talk about it is a chain universe. This is one universe that is consistently exploding, banging, and crunching, depending on the amount of dark energy and dark matter, which now I'm way outside of my bounds here, right? Depending on the amount of black energy or dark energy and dark matter in the universe, it could bang forever, it could crunch forever. We have no idea, okay? But if it had banged and crunched, our only way of measuring things, our only way of talking about things as existent is inside of our own blue circles, inside of our own universe. That's how we measure things, with time and space. When you talk about where something is, you're talking about a point in space. When you talk about when something is, you're talking about a point in time, okay? If the universe had big banged and big crunched an infinite number of times, we would have no way to measure beyond the last crunch. Our language breaks down. Our method of measuring simply breaks down, okay? Now, like I said, I'm way outside of bounds here, so I'm going to try and bring it back in. This is the way I've animated the Big Bang, Big Crunch. Keynote's a pretty cool tool. Okay, so we're getting back on more solid ground here. Physicists talk about the cosmos the same way philosophers talk about the universe. Everything I've said about cosmological arguments up to this point, you could supplement the word universe for the word cosmos, and it would apply the exact same way, okay? Another way they talk about it is a chain universe. This is one universe that is consistently exploding, banging, and crunching, depending on the amount of dark energy and dark matter, which now I'm way outside of my bounds here, right? Depending on the amount of black energy or dark matter in the universe, it could Convergent semantics, in this sense, universe and cosmos. Philosophers treat the word universe as a synonym for everything. Cosmologists treat the word cosmos as a synonym for everything, okay? So we're just going to go back to treating the word universe as a synonym for everything. If the universe equals everything, if two words are synonyms, you should be able to replace either one in any statement and not change the statement, okay? So look at what's going on here. Premise 2, universe exists, therefore universe has a cause, blah, blah, blah. If the universe equals everything, watch where the word universe changes to everything. What's changed? The argument's the same if they're synonyms, right? That's what I said. If the word's synonyms, you can replace one for the other, and nothing has changed. I'm going to put it back. There's universe, there's everything, okay? Universe, there's everything. Universe, there's everything. I made a lot of these slides. If the universe equals everything, if and only if, and God equals a thing, it has a cause. You see the problem here? That was the problem that they tried to work around by making Kalam. Kalam has the same flaw as the classic. It just takes 34 minutes to flush it out. Does that make sense? Does that follow? There's more to this. Remember I talked about the verbal sleight of hand? This is a little more up my alley. I like studying formal logic, okay? Notice premise 1 on the left and premise 1 on the right. Everything which exists has a cause. Everything which begins to exist has a cause. I said it's a verbal sleight of hand. Premise 1 on the left-hand side, the reason it was so easy to see what was wrong with it is because premise 1 includes God. If your premise includes your conclusion, this is known as begging the question. Circular reasoning. That's what you're doing, okay? Well, the workaround was to go begins to exist on the right side in Kalam, so now they've excluded God. So the premise on the right does not include God, the premise on the left does include God. So we got around that circular reasoning problem, right? But we just exposed it actually does. So if we can think about two sets, a set on the left called begins to exist, all the things that begin to exist is in the set on the left, and all the things that do not begin to exist in the green circle on the right. So now we've got to put things into our set. Everything except God goes in the left set. Begins to exist, right? Because that's what premise 1 in Kalam is saying. Everything which begins to exist has a cause. What else goes in the right set? Things that don't begin to exist. Give me a list of things that don't begin to exist in the way apologists are using this term. So, to clue you in, if a set or if a list or if a group only contains one item, the list is a synonym for the word itself. There is no list. There's no point in grouping things if you only have one item. So what this should expose is it actually does include God. Because what I said earlier is not begins to exist, only God is on that list. It's a synonym. So things that do not exist, the synonym would actually supplement premise 1. Does that make sense? Including the conclusion in your premise is begging the question. What they've done is they've said God does not have a clause. See how premise 1 includes the conclusion? They're trying to conclude that God exists. God does not have a cause in premise 1. If you include the premise and if you include the conclusion in your premise, you have begged the question. You've got circular reasoning. Okay? I'm going to give you a question in just a second. Except one more thing that I really like to point out is this is also known as an illicit negative. You cannot get a positive conclusion from a negative premise. This is a formal logical fallacy. It means your idea is not even coherent. So, when Professor Mustache asked Kent Hovind, where did God come from? Technically, he was the hero of that story. It seemed like he was off base because Kent never actually made the classic argument, but because the Kalam has the same flaw as the classic argument, technically what he asked him was fair. All right, moving on. We're going to start beating up on some of these other words here. Exists. What does it mean for something to exist? There are different kinds of existence, aren't there? Do people use the word exist in only one way? Do all things exist the same way? These are questions you can ask somebody who's made the mistake I'm about to point out to you about this duplicity of the word exist, okay? So things exist in one of two ways, either materially or immaterially. That is a dichotomy. So think about a water droplet. Water behaves a certain way. If you zoom in on water, you start seeing molecules. A water molecule is, I don't need to tell anybody here, 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. The periodic table of elements tells us all the elements in the world, okay? However many configurations of protons and neutrons and electrons you get, that's what the periodic table is made out of. Everything material comes off of that list. If you zoom in a little more, you can see specific atoms. If you keep zooming in more, you'll see protons, neutrons, and electrons. If you zoom in even more, I get out of bounds again, you start talking about gluons, leptons, up quarks, down quarks, muons, bosons. I could do this for an hour, okay? Things which exist materially are above the line here, okay? Things which exist immaterially, how do they exist? Conceptual objects, numbers, things like that, okay? They exist immaterially. They're still functions of our own minds. All right, so if we ask somebody, what does it mean for something to exist? They probably have not thought of this. They think everything exists the same way. So if you ask them, do all things exist the same way? They probably haven't thought about this. Maybe you can knock them off script. All right, the phrase X exists is tantamount to saying if you poke a stick in the right corner, X is going to poke back. It is to say X exists in such a way I can have knowledge of its existence. Otherwise, you wouldn't be saying it exists. Make sense? Am I losing you? Here's another way to think about this. Think about unicorns and horses. Unicorns are fictional. Horses are non-fictional. Unicorns are conceptual only. They exist in our concepts. Horses are non-fictional and conceptual. It's both. They exist different ways. Not everything exists the same way. Unicorns and horses don't exist the same way. But if you ask somebody, do all things exist the same way, maybe you get them thinking down this road. These things are not equivalent, but to treat them as one, to treat the word exist as if it is one consistent thing, is the bread and butter of apologetics. So, our friend Kent Hovind used the word existence, but he knows it's contingent upon having a where and a when to exist, but he doesn't apply it to his own claim version of a God. That's my abbreviation, CVOAG. I'll say claim version of a God, but I'll speak it out in full every time. What he's trying to do is he's trying to make a case for the existence of supernatural things by appealing to the existence of natural things. No amount of existent natural things establishes the existence of supernatural things. So to ask someone this, to get them off script, you could say, does the existence of natural things establish the existence of supernatural things? The right answer is no, of course it does not. All right, back to our baseline here. We picked on cause, we picked on begins to, we picked on universe, we picked on exists. What's left? Every word of the argument is duplicitous. Every word of the argument is equivocation. This is fun for me because I took out all the words we just beat up on, the way they're cheating with these words, right? And I took them out. This can be vexing and comical at the same time. I'm a masochist. I love this stuff. I could do it all day. So here they are again. Here are all the words we just picked apart, and they're gone. That's all that's left over. Which has a, the has a, you follow. No words of consequence are left over once you've picked apart all the mistakes they've made. This is why it can be so challenging to respond. It's a paradox, and every single word has been used duplicitously. Again, this is their bread and butter. It's all they've got. You may think, someone who spends the inordinate amount of time thinking about this as I do, that I dislike the cosmological argument. You might think I hate the cosmological argument. But in fact, the opposite is true. I love the cosmological arguments, and here is why. This is Friedrich Nietzsche. He says the most perfidious way of harming a cause consists of defending it deliberately with faulty arguments. If you're making a case for the existence of something which doesn't exist, and you're causing harm people by making these arguments, convincing them of these things, and you're using bad arguments, you're actually harming your own cause. It just takes a few minutes to expose how. All right, so to get off the formal element of this, we'll talk about it colloquially. This is our list of sounds like. I'm not going to make you listen to this again. But it's important to, as we go through these, because I'm going to give you responses for each one of these. As we go through these, it's a useful tool to know what kind of answer specific types of questions yield. This is very useful. There are questions out there, you've all heard them before, you know everything I'm going to tell you about this already. There are who, what, why, when, where, and how questions, okay? What kind of answers does each one of these questions yield? If I ask you a where question, I have asked you about a location in space. If I ask you a when question, I've asked you about a location and time. Who questions yield agents. How questions yields processes and methods. Why questions yield purpose. And a what question is kind of a wild card. It can mean a lot of different things. Okay, so back to our list. These are the casual ways you're going to hear the cosmological argument come out. No one's going to say premise 1, premise 2. You're going to hear these casually, okay? So where did everything come from? We can answer method 1. We can just say, I don't know, which is fair. I don't know where everything came from. It's an honest position if you actually don't know. It is a dishonest position to say you know if you actually do not know, okay? So don't be afraid of I don't know. It's a perfectly defensible position. I would suggest you say something more akin to, I don't know, how do you suggest we find out? This yields method, right? I don't know. What do you think is the most reliable way to learn? This is an epistemology question. What's the best way to get the right answer about this question you just asked me? How are you using the word everything? This is more my style, method 2, right? Question, definitions, assumptions, fallacies. How can you know about the existence of or where outside of everything? Everything is all of the wheres, remember? Russell's paradox. So if you're asking where did everything come from, and inside the circle is all things, it's all the froms. If I tell you I'm from Colorado, you only know where Colorado is because you know where Nebraska is and Utah and Arizona. If you don't know where those things are, the word from has no meaning, okay? Froms only mean something relative to other froms, locations. Froms are things. Colorado is a thing. It's a place. It's a noun. Everything includes all the froms and all of the wheres. So if someone asks you, where did everything come from? What they're really asking you is, where did all the froms come from? Or where did all the wheres come from? You see how I have to say, they force me to say silly things? Because they say silly things at you, you have to say silly things back at them, okay? Oh, I lost my feed here. There it goes. That's my funny face, because I feel silly saying silly things, but they force me into it. You can ask them, are wheres things? Maybe this will help them figure it out. Are froms things? Maybe this will help them figure it out. I don't know. Next question, how did everything get here? Again, the standard, I don't know. That's fair. I'm losing my feed here. Hold on, cable. I don't know, how do you suggest we find out? Isn't everything all of the processes? Isn't everything all of the methods? Isn't here all of the hows? That sounds really silly. It's paradoxical because they're asking you to respond to a paradox, so you're giving them a paradox right back at them. Something can't come from nothing. Okay. The standard questions, I'm going to leave those out from now on. You could also ask them, how can you know what nothing is capable of? Do you have a nothing for us to examine? I've asked this before in panel and it got a laugh. You guys should be laughing at my jokes. If something can't come from nothing, then how did your claimed version of a God make something come from nothing? They haven't thought about this. It's because they're co-locating their claimed version of a God with nothing at the same time. Notice something can't come from nothing is a double negative. When you're doing math in high school and college and you had two negatives to multiply, what happened? The negatives canceled out. It's actually a positive. So you say, isn't this a double negative? Didn't you really say something can come from something? Something can come from something. We see something come from something all the time. But when they ask you it in a double negative, it sounds profane. But when you say something can come from something, it sounds mundane. So they say something can't come from nothing, and they hit you with a double negative, so respond back with pointing out the double negative. All right. From nothing, nothing comes. Same problem applies. It's got a double negative in it. The negatives cancel out. They're just saying from something, something comes. I'm not going to keep beating this up. There's never been nothing. Nothing is a big subject. I'm going to circle back to it. Don't let me forget, because some of these subjects overlap. The next question is, or the next statement is, there's always been something. You can say to them with, well, technically, yes. Everything which began to exist began at the beginning of existence. That's the problem that they're trying to shove off on you by saying there's always been something. And I agree with them. If a claimed version of a God exists, it began to exist at the beginning of existence. You can agree with them. This is more of a statement than a question. You can say, I agree. As long as there's been existence, existent things have existed. I feel silly selling paradoxes to you, but that's what they're giving you. Another one, I agree. Since the beginning of existence, when existence came into existence, all existent things have existed. Things don't create themselves. I would agree with the statement, inside the universe, we only have examples of things not creating themselves. What happened before the Big Bang? Phil, what happened before the Big Bang?
What's north of the North Pole?
Phil has not seen these slides. The Big Bang and Big Bang cosmology is how we study existence. It's how we study space-time, okay? Our language, our ability to measure breaks down at the Big Bang in a mirror looking backwards, running the tape backwards, okay? Red shift, blue shift. This is not a science class, but you get the idea, okay? The North Pole is how we measure how far things are away from the equator, north or south, okay? If you're standing on the North Pole, the only direction you can travel is south. If you are, hypothetically, it hurts me to say this, but if you are standing at the Big Bang, ouch, the only direction for you to travel is into the future. So if you ask what happened before the Big Bang, this person doesn't know what the Big Bang is. Make sense? This is from Christopher Hitchens. It was quite serendipitous that Reb put Christopher Hitchens up on the screen today because we love that guy. This is an expression of the measurement problem, okay? We don't have the ability to measure past the end of the yardstick. We don't have the ability to measure past the end of red shift, blue shift, work backwards to Big Bang. Make sense? There's a whole lot more that can be said there, but we're going to leave that at Christopher Hitchens, and Phil said it so eloquently. Why is there something rather than nothing? We actually went over this earlier. This was on the cover of Skeptic magazine. We're not going to beat that up anymore. Who created the universe? Remember, who requires an agent to answer. So you have baked into the question your answer. You've begged the question. You have assumed it is a who that created the universe. You have begged the question. So what do we say to someone who's making this error? Why are you assuming there was a who? How can a who exist outside the universe? How can a who exist outside of existence? This is their error. It's not your fault they're making this error. This is Ray Comfort. Okay? I like the response. He didn't say this, but I'm sure he would stand by it. We know God exists because creation exists. You can't have creation without a creator in the same way you can't have a building without a building without a builder, or a painting without a painter. Ray Comfort. That's my paraphrase, but he has said that many, many times in fragments. Okay? All right. We talked a lot here, so we should be able to recognize some of these issues he's got going on already. He's begging the question. He's conflating invented things with discovered things. He's using material examples for the existence of immaterial things by argumentation. So I would ask Ray something like this. Why do you get to call it creation? He's begging the question by saying every building has a builder, every creation has a creator, right? Or is this a good analogy? Because I can go talk with a builder. I can go read their blueprints. I can go talk to a painter. So we're using a bad analogy by equating creations with creators and buildings with builders. So point out this is a bad analogy. Now, Ray's a pro. This isn't going to shake his foundation. But your uncle at the Thanksgiving dinner table, this is going to shake him up a little bit, okay? Is the word creation an invented kind of thing or a discovered kind of thing? Words were invented by us. We made them up. They mean what we say they mean, okay? So an exister exists because existence exists. Now I got to say more silly things at you. A realtor exists because real estate exists. This is just as silly as saying a creator exists because creation exists. Ray just doesn't realize it, and you're throwing it back at him. If murderers exist because murder exists, then in what way does murder exist? The word murder is an invented kind of thing. We decided there are wrong times to kill things, so we call that murder, just by definition alone, okay? So he's making, which is my hobby horse, an analytic synthetic failure by confusing our ways of talking about things with what the things actually are. All right, I said I was going to circle back to this, and I am. This is the word nothing, okay? It's going to get a little abstract from here out, because to talk about nothing is paradoxical in and of itself, but it's a little fun too. This is a meme that comes off of Frank Turek's website. Frank Turek is a famous religious apologist. He's putting this out there into the void. He says, no one created something out of nothing, which he calls the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. We recognize the issue right away, don't we? They're co-locating a something and a nothing at the same time on the bottom. The second meme on the right, you got sassy guy on the left and silly guy on the right. Sassy guy says, so you're an atheist? He says, yes. Why don't you believe in God? Silly guy says, I don't believe in silly magic. Sassy guy says, who created the universe? Silly guy says, it came from nothing. Sassy guy gives him the evil eye. These are from Christian apologetics websites, okay? So understanding what's wrong with these things and explaining to somebody what's wrong with these things is what we're going to do next. So I'm going to give you a limerick, all right? People like this limerick. It sounds ridiculous. I'm going to apologize again in advance, but here it goes. It's useful, okay? Nothing can't exist, because for nothing to exist, existence must first exist. If existence exists, nothing can't exist. This limerick is making the universe collapse on itself, okay? I'm committing the same things I'm accusing other people of doing, right? I'm equivocating the word nothing, and the reason why is because nothing is a divergent semantic. People don't use the word nothing in one way, okay? They use conceptual nothing, which I'm going to call Charlie November. They use physicists nothing, which I'm going to call Papa November. They use apologists nothing, which I'm going to call Alpha November. And they use nothing, which I'm going to call November, okay? Digging a little deeper on these, casual nothing is air. You would say, there's nothing on that wall over there. There's nothing on my agenda for later this afternoon. You don't mean there's literal absence of existence on your calendar. You don't mean there's literal absence of evidence on the wall. There's paint on the wall. There's dust on the wall. It's not nothing. It's something, but you just say nothing casually, like I've been using nothing up to this point. So it's a casual nothing way of using it, okay? Boredom. What'd you do yesterday? I did nothing. You're saying you were bored, right? You're using the word nothing to express your boredom. But it's not nothing. It's still something. You were respirating. You were circulating. You ate something. You did something yesterday. You didn't do nothing. But people use the word nothing as if it's just one thing all the time. Divergent semantic. Don't do that, okay? Empty, blank, unoccupied. You get the idea. Physicist, nothing. It's red. Quantum vacuum. Go ask them. Read their books, okay? I've heard really smart guys, Lawrence Krauss, Sean Carroll, I've heard really smart guys talk about nothing, and they'll say, how could the universe create itself out of nothing? I'm not saying this, they're saying this. And they'll respond back with something like, because nothing is inherently unstable. I'll put another guy up there with his head blowing off, but that's what they say. I love to read their books, but I'm in no position to explain their ideas, okay? Nothing is no things. Break the word apart, nothing. No things. It's no space-time, no existence, no universe. The absence of existence. This sideways L is a logical formal way of saying not. So not space, not time, not at space-time. You follow. It's not things. November is not things. Apologist nothing, when you ask them, they'll say, it's what rocks dream about. Which is really just kind of a throwaway. They're trying to throw the dogs off the scent is what they're trying to do by saying that. And what they really mean when you dig down deep, they actually mean what I've identified here as nothing, November, except my claimed version of a God. Remember earlier how they put God outside of everything, right? This is the paradox. So when apologists use the word nothing, they're not talking about nothing, they're talking about the absence of existence except for my God. They're making a case of special pleading, okay? This is a big slide. It's heavy. I'm going to work through it real fast. Conceptual nothing or casual nothing is just a concept. In one way, it's a concept. It's absence inside of existence, absence of event on your calendar, absence of stuff on the wall. Physicist nothing is red again. I'm going to read through this, and this is recorded, so just bear with me, okay? Inductive inference of possible events outside the realm of our instruments can gather data based on observing events inside the universe, measuring them, assuming cosmological consistency, describing them with balanced equations, and hypothesizing possibilities. This is what I think physicists are talking about when they say nothing. You want to know what they think? Ask them. This is what I think they're talking about, okay? I know it's a lot. It's heavy. I'm sure you didn't follow that, but it's immortalized on the video. Ask them. Read their books. I'm in no position to wax poetic on what they say. Or feel free to go get your own PhD in astro-theoretical physicists and develop your own theories. Report back to us. I'm sure we'll all be very interested to hear. The next one is November, nothing, absence of existence. Okay, again, it exists as a concept, it's non-existence. It's a paradox. It is impossible for us to know because it lays outside the area in which we are able to know things, measure things. Okay, the orange is emphasis. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper here, and again, we're going to go slightly abstract, so hang on. Remember when you were a kid and you dealt with number lines, integer number lines? In the middle, you've got 0. On the right side, you've got, how far does it go? Infinity. Can you count that high? Can you add to infinity? Can you multiply to infinity? Let's talk about infinity. What if I told you I have 1,000,000 bananas in my car? You'd probably be skeptical. You should be, because that's a lot of bananas. I don't think 1,000,000 bananas could fit in anybody's car, okay? If I told you I had 1,000,000 bananas, and I was insistent I had a million bananas in my car, and you wanted to see it, I could show it to you, okay? If I told you I had infinity bananas in my car, you don't need to go look at my car to verify. You know I've done something wrong. You know I've made a mistake somewhere, okay? And the reason why is because 1,000,000 is a number. Infinity is not a number. It's a placeholder. It's a symbol we use where a number would make sense in our heads, okay? It's not a number. It seems like a number, but it's not a number. In the same way, 0, this is where I'm going to lose somebody, I promise you. Somebody's got an objection out there. I want to hear it later on. 0 at the middle of the number integer line, think about it for a second. 0 is neither even nor odd. It's neither negative nor positive. Can you count to 0? Oh, my screen got cut off there. Sorry. It says, can you count to 0? No, you can't count to 0. In the same way you can't count to infinity, right? 0 is not a number. It's a placeholder where we would use a number would make sense in our heads, okay? It's not a number. Think about it. When you're doing your taxes and you're adding up and you get to all those columns that say 0, you don't sit there and type out plus 0, plus 0, plus 0 on the calculator. You just skip all of those because 0 is not a number, okay? Now, if you follow it, if it follows a 1 or a 2 or a 3, now you're talking about 10, 20, 30. Those are numbers. But just 0 by itself, that's not a number. 0 is not a number. Can you have 0 bananas in my car? 0 bananas is the same number as 0 cocktails. You don't need to look in my car if I tell you I've got 0 bananas or 0 cocktails, right? I'm further illustrating that 0 is not a number. Anyone who has told you that they can divide by 0, you don't have to check their work, okay? This person doesn't know what 0 or division is or both, okay? This is the paradox to end all paradoxes, okay? I did this morning. Eating a breakfast burrito at Farmer Boys, I did this. See if the video is going to play. Plus 0, plus 0, plus 0, plus 0. I'm not changing. Now watch. Plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1. It changes, doesn't it? But when you do plus 0, it doesn't change because 0 is not a number. Have I driven this home enough? Okay. 0 isn't a number. It's a label we use where a number would make sense in our minds. But we are forced to talk about it as if it is a number, okay? The symbol means not a number. It's a placeholder where a number would make sense. November is not a thing in the same way. It is the absence of things. November, no thing, not things. Nothing isn't a something. It's a label we use where one would make sense in our head. Remember we talk about nothing, November? It's not a thing. You can't have nothing and something together in the same place at the same time. It is the mother lode of paradoxes, okay? Yet, when apologists use it, they treat it casually. They just talk about it like no big deal, right? This is the paradox. When they talk about apologists' nothing, they use it as a concept, and they'll say nothing, November, and their claimed version of a God. That's about the 4th time I've illustrated that because that's everything that's going on with the cosmological argument. And at the top, if you look here, it changes. They're also going to tell you that nothing is not equal to their God. God is something. So it gets to be nothing and something at the same time. Here's our memes we started out with. If you'll notice on the top, when they're saying, this is your problem, atheist, answer this problem. November, November, you've got to defend November, November. All the zeros and bananas and infinities, right? You've got to defend that. But when it's my turn, I get to defend apologist nothing. Again, duplicity, equivocation. Follow? And then you got the silly guy over here on the right. It came from nothing. That's November, November. But it's not any kind of nothing that you would recognize, i.e. apologist nothing, right? Okay, I'm just over an hour. I did cut a little bit out, but I'm happy with what we left back in. So I'm not going to do a conclusion because I feel like I've just bludgeoned you guys with ideas today, okay? So with that, we'll throw it to questions.
Do you have any examples of you going through that process with an apologetic debater that we could, look at and see how it works?
Yes, I feel like this was an advertisement for Phil's series because we did do a little bit of cosmological arguments, maybe 4 or 5 times. I don't have the floor all to myself, and I don't have my slides, so I've only got my hands and my gesticulations to go through this, that, and the other, and it's woefully insufficient. But I was asked several questions, and I don't know if you've watched any of the series, but early on in the series, Phil was close friends with someone named Kelly Clemenson, who is a very big fan of the cosmological argument. He'll say, begins, 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 cosmological argument. He'll do it over and over and over again. And I respond to him several different times. And one of my favorite responses in that situation, when I don't have my slides and I can't monopolize the conversation, is I talk about the fact that we tend to think of things like up and down as intuitive, okay? If I throw a ball into the air, it goes up, makes sense to me, and it comes down, makes sense. That's intuitive, duh, right? But if I'm in Australia and I throw the ball up and down, your relative position to somebody standing in Australia right now is different because they're on a different side of the globe. Sorry, the Earth is it's an oblate sphere, that's just all there's to it. But if they're in Australia and you're over here, and you go both from up and down are actually relative, aren't they? It seems intuitive because we live very close to something which is very impactful, which is the gravity of the Earth, right? So everything I throw up comes down because we're close to something which has a lot of impact on our everyday experience. In the same way, we think of past, present, and future as something very intuitive because we're also close to an event that's very, very impactful for our lives, which is Big Bang origin, cosmological, okay? Past, present, and future is only relative to us in one way of speaking because we're on this side of the universe. Past is over here, present's right here, future is right here. But if you were on this side of the universe, the Big Bang is over here, now you've got your past, present, future inverted in the same way up and down was inverted up here. Follow? This is a way to get somebody thinking about it. It's not going to make someone like Kelly go, oh, game over, God doesn't exist anymore. But it's a way to thwart that conversation. And there was half a dozen of those in Phil's series.
If you could mention what the series is for other people.
Nobody knows what it's called, and it's called Believers and Non-Believers in Discussion. Phil got up to 11 or 12 of them.
18.
18. That's what I said, 18. I was on, I don't know, half a dozen, maybe 8 or so. And there'll be those in there. And I wasn't the only one talking about this. I'm not the only person that understands it. And there are people that understand this at a more robust level than myself.
I'm not going to ask anything profound, Derek. I'm just going to say my uncle at the dinner table wouldn't know the first thing about the Kalam cosmological argument or the classical cosmological argument. But what I would like to know, and what I'd like to hear you talk about at least, is why is it important for us to argue with people who believe this stuff?
It's a personal decision. I think of it this way. Jeff likes this. If you found out one of your loved ones was being victimized by a Nigerian prince email scheme, they were sending money off, you would be devastated. You would be apoplectic, beside yourself. You're sending money to somebody on the internet saying they're a Nigerian prince, right? Because they're being taken advantage of. They're being deceived, right? You don't want to be deceived, so sympathetic rationale, reciprocal altruism, you would want them to help rescue you from this belief that you have, right? Now, I don't go around knocking on people's doors. I don't proselytize, okay? I wear shirts that say atheist. I wear AtheistU wristbands, which, by the way, I'm giving away if anybody wants. I have a sign that says Ask an Atheist. You like it. I advertise what I'm all about. And my analogy, call it a reconciliation, if you will, is to think about the mall. When you go to the mall, there's the brick and mortar stores, right? You got Pacific Sun and Bed Bath and Beyond or whatever. And then you have the kiosks in the middle where they sell the shoe cleaners and the cell phones and all that crap in the middle, right? Well, when you walk by the kiosk, the little girl grabs you and says, hey, buy my stuff, buy my stuff. She bothers you. She gets in your face. But when you walk by the brick and mortar stores, they leave you alone. If you walk in, you've granted them consent to talk about their store, their wares, okay? If I've got a sign that says Ask an Atheist, or if I've got a wristband that says AtheistU, or a t-shirt that says Atheist on it, and someone starts asking me questions, they have granted me consent to talk about their ideas. Now, they hold all the reins. I'm not going to push them any farther than they want to go. Sometimes I could do this until I'm hoarse, until they're blue in the face. But that's how I see it. You follow? So if you would want someone to help you when you had a bad idea, and you would want to help somebody else when they've got a bad idea, that's why I discuss this. I'm trying to do as much good in the world as possible and as little evil in the world as possible. Is that fair? Is that what you're looking for?
This is more of a kind of a statement. I think what you're doing is important. The reason I like this sort of thing is because theists are using these arguments, right? They're, and
Joe, we can't hear you.
That's okay. Theists are using these arguments. Who put the microphone so low?
Dorothy did. I saw her.
No.
That's what I was laughing at.
No, I did. That's me. And then they teach people basically how to use these arguments. Now, I've seen lay people not understand this stuff, but they think that their apologetic leaders are making sense. They look at them as authorities, and they'll pull out these arguments. Some people who do use the arguments use them fallaciously, as you pointed out. So that's the statement part. I just wonder if you could respond to many of the people who are believers don't go here at all. This is way too complex for them. So how would you approach a more average person who doesn't go into Kalam and whatnot?
And granted, this doesn't work for everybody because I spend an unconscionable amount of time studying and researching and engaging in this conversation. This doesn't work for everybody because sometimes you can't know everything. I mean, to be good at this conversation, there aren't any shortcuts. You just have to know a lot of stuff about rhetoric and logic and physics and philosophy and psychology. There's just a lot of things you need to know. I'm interested in all that stuff. It all comports with how I operate. So my method probably won't work for everybody, but what I do is I let them guide the conversation. I ask them, why do you believe? What do you believe and why do you believe it? And when they start giving their reasons, usually they go on for 20 minutes and I'm taking notes, right? And I'm saying, oh, you said the word creation. How are you using the word creation? Oh, you said the word information. How are you using the word information? Is that an invented thing or is that a discovered kind of thing? Oh, well, that's an invented kind of thing. Right, so it's just our way of talking about what chemicals are doing, right? So I let them guide the conversation. I don't know if I would advise a novice to do the same thing. I'm not holding myself out as an expert, but I think a neophyte might find that more challenging because they're going to want to learn 2 or 3 arguments. Like I mentioned earlier, the evolutionary argument against naturalism, that's a whole other can of worms. Even this argument that I just presented today was just the classic and just the Kalam. There's the Thomistic version of the cosmological argument, and there's the Aristotelian version, which is the contingency argument and then a different one. But I can only get through one of these in just over an hour today. So, and the same number of problems that these 2 arguments have, those have just as well. But that would be way too much overkill. So the best way, I would think, is to ask somebody questions, and then when they give you answers, take the time to go back and look them up. Ask me. I'm easy to reach. Talk to guys or watch guys do it online. There's thousands and thousands of hours online of atheist experience, atheist debates. And we have 2 Christopher Hitchens references today. He's fantastic at this stuff. Watch the pros do it, listen to what they say, and then go back and try it on your interlocutor, which is a fancy way of saying conversation participant. Is that fair? Is that what you're looking for?
Can I throw out a few Christmas table objections that your family might have that you're sitting down to? Okay.
Please.
Why don't you believe in God?
Why don't you believe in vampires?
Well, a vampire is not the same thing as a god. A vampire is an imaginary character created in fiction.
How do you know?
I just know God has been somebody in my life since I was a child. My parents brought me up to be good.
Well, what if I told you I just know that vampires exist because my parents brought me up to believe that vampires exist?
Then I would be afraid. What are some others? You guys can think of others?
These are counter examples. Somebody goes, well.
Look at the trees.
You just want to sin. You
What
just
is
want to
sin?
do your stuff.
How are you using the word sin?
Trespasses against God.
Okay. Can I trespass against Dracula?
Yeah, I don't. Yes.
How does one go about trespassing against Dracula? Demonstrate for me.
You would put garlic around your neck.
Okay, so how would you know that this perturbed Dracula enough to make him act in your life in a way where you could know he existed? And this is a testable hypothesis. I could put garlic around my neck right now, and you could not, and we can see how Dracula, if he exists, responds. Are you willing to engage in this?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so
Okay.
now we're at the testing phase. We're talking about the fact that our ideas are based in tests and evidence and things which are observable.
Okay. Well, maybe that doesn't work with vampires, but I'm sure it works with God because I prayed for something and it happened.
Okay, so this is also a testable hypothesis. I think somewhere, I'm not an expert in the Bible, but I think somewhere in the Bible it talks about if two are together at the same time and they pray for something, it will come true, it will happen, okay? We can look it up on our phones with what the Bible says, right? So let's pray right now that sometime in the next 10 seconds a Volkswagen Bug falls through the ceiling. And if it doesn't happen, we can count this as one data point against the existence of your God or against the effectiveness of intercessory prayer. Are you game?
Okay.
Game.
Okay.
Now we pray for the existence of a Volkswagen Bug driving the ceiling in 10 seconds. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't mean God doesn't exist. It's just one more failed test. It's just one more data point towards the non-existence of this entity.
But you didn't really want it.
Oh, and God's plan does not include that for you.
I just said no. Sometimes the answer is
If it doesn't exist, sometimes Dracula answers no too.
Well, but I like to believe that when in heaven, there's justice that we don't see on earth.
You like to believe?
I like to believe that.
Okay.
It's important for me to believe that.
I like to believe that I have $1 billion in my bank account. Does my preference for something have any bearing on whether or not it's accurate? No. No, it doesn't. Okay, so things actually have to be accurate. And I want right ideas in my head. Do you want right ideas in your head?
Yes.
Okay, so how do we go about getting right ideas in our head? If I said there was $1 billion in my bank account, how would you go about verifying that?
I want evidence.
We have methods, right? We have the app on my phone. I can walk over to the ATM. I can go to the bank teller and she can print me out a statement, right? I can show you those things. I want accurate ideas in my head. So just because I want $1 billion to be in my bank account doesn't change the number. I want to know right things. Just you and I are on the same team about that. I want to know if this claimed version of God of yours exists. How do we go about knowing that your claimed version of God exists in the same way you can know what my bank statement is, my bank account balance is?
We would have to see evidence of God.
I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you so much. What kind of evidence specifically? What kind of evidence would be sufficient, would be commensurate for this type of claim?
Well, that's something I would ask you. What would it take to prove to you that my God exists?
Well, I don't use the word prove because it doesn't apply in this context. Prove is a technical term which applies to mathematics and formal logic. I would say evidence, just what type of evidence would suffice. So I'm not telling you what to say, but this is how I use the word prove. Okay, it's a technical term. What type of evidence would be sufficient to establish the existence of something that's claimed? This is a good question, and there are two answers that I really like. The first one is, I would need the same type, quality, and amount of evidence you would need to believe in the existence of Vishnu, vampires, pick your outsider test, okay? So that's the first test. The second answer is, if your claimed version of a God exists, as you have asserted it does, it already knows what evidence would convince me, and it could provide it at any moment, yet it doesn't do so. So here we are. Every moment that passes is another data point that fails, that suggests the thing does not exist. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Anybody else have anything along those lines? What do you hear from relatives and friends?
I just wanted to make a general comment. For you.
Yes.
She can repeat it if you don't want to.
Um,
I'm telling you what you do. You repeat it.
Okay.
This is a personal issue with me, is the misuse or the changed use of beg the question. You're using it in the way I understand it, in the proper way of understanding it. And everybody may have heard this, but when you ask somebody if they still beat their sick grandmother, that's begging the question,
Yes.
because you imply, you insist that at one point you did beat your sick grandmother. And there's easier versions to ask that are less dramatic, like, are you still a liar? Because now you assume that the person was known as a liar. And that's begging the question in the classical sense, the way Eric was using it. But almost 100% now I'm seeing it used as a new version of saying, it makes you want to ask. And that's the way it's being used popularly now. And I see this in the newspaper, even in places I wouldn't expect.
Do you want to summarize it real quick for the recording?
I believe Jeff is talking about begging the question and how the very questions, the form they take, have an implication in the answers. In other words, are you still beating your wife? Well, that means you did at one point, or beating your poor grandmother. So a lot of the questions that I don't mean to pick on Christians, people who believe in the supernatural ask, a lot of their questions are weighted with their own assumptions, that we all agree on some basic assumptions that we need to pick apart and figure out what those are in order to accurately answer what they're probably trying to get to. Is that fair?
And I was complaining about the popular usage, misuse
So-
of the term.
So
Congratulating Eric for the proper.
I think a lot of the friction here, and everything you're saying is exactly right. A lot of the friction here with how this term gets employed so frequently and colloquially, people confuse, and this is part of the problem is in the phrasing itself. There is a difference between begging the question and question begging. Unfortunately, it's just because the words are inverted, people get confused. And what you're talking about is, like I mentioned earlier, is begging the question. That's starting with your answer. You include the answer in the question itself. That's begging the question. Question begging is like you're talking about, which is it makes you want to ask. That's where people get confused, and that's pretty common.
Give us an example of that.
Well, begging the question is like you talked about. It's a loaded question. Are you still cheating on your taxes? The implication is you either are or were cheating on your taxes at one point. If you say yes or no, you've granted the assumption that you're cheating on your taxes. Begging the question is, like I was asked earlier, hey, can you please show me that thing? I really want to see it again. She's question begging. She's saying, I really want to ask this question of you. There's a difference between begging the question and question begging. Bad terminology.
There's still some confusion. Talk a little bit more about that.
Someone will ask, when you look at, they'll cite something like the preponderance of action hero movies in the last 5 to 7 years. And somebody writing about that will mention 5 superhero movies and say, but it begs the question, can we ever have a movie made for grown-up adults? And
as if that's not a grown-up adult film.
They'll use the example of the 5, 10 action hero movies and say, well, that begs the question, if
Exactly.
we'll ever have this. Meaning, what they're really trying to say is,
This makes you want to ask.
it makes you want to ask,
Right.
raise the question.
Exactly. Yeah.
I see what you're
So to
saying.
summarize,
That's
like
the most common way now.
Like
Unless
to-
you're talking to somebody in an intellectual environment who uses the
question begging versus begging the question. Yeah, begging the question is the formal fallacy, and question begging would be like a news reporter saying, "Hey, the football team's record is 7-3. That that makes you want that. I don't want to make the same mistake myself. It begs the question: can they beat the next team they're going to play? Because they're a good team at 7-3. It begs the question. It's not question begging. Follow? Squared away? Well, I think we're done. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.